there's a lot that comes with growth. We're definitely facing challenges in Black Rock City, as you all are, with how we make our growth sustainable, how we remain inclusive, but how we also ensure that the culture and the kind of source energy that people really take from Black Rock City stays on track and stays authentic, and that we can find ways to engage the community in the dialogue that then shapes our direction. And Trippi Longstocking has been running placement for Black Rock City, which is a Herculean task. She just hosted a theme camp summit in San Francisco. That was an amazing success. And she's just articulate and wonderful. And I'm so happy that she's here for her first European Leadership Summit. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Trippi Longstocking.
Hello, everybody. So how many of you have heard about cultural direction setting? Okay, a little over half the room. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, you're about to learn a lot. And for all of us, my goal today is really to take you behind the scenes of this project, of this process, and talk about some of the takeaways, the things that we're learning as we do this. We are in the middle of it, so I want to kind of take you on the ride and honor the fact that you all are culture leaders in your communities, at your events, for your organizations. And I hope that some of the learnings that we're having in this project will be insightful or at least very interesting to you in some way. And so that's my goal, is to kind of share that context with you. So where this began for me was about a year and a half ago. And I was driving home from Black Rock City 2017. It had been my first cycle as the placement manager, which meant that I learned a lot. I was a theme camp lead before that, so had very little context with the organization. And as I was driving home, I was thinking about two major topics. The first topic I was thinking about was plug and play, turnkey camping, convenience camping, whatever you like to call it. And I was thinking about how over the past couple of years, from the outside looking in, not a lot had seemed to have changed. But from my experience in that first year on the job, I had learned that, wow, a lot was actually happening. It was very busy. There were a lot of thoughts and ideas and things we were trying. And I wondered, how do we move forward from this perception that nothing has changed? How do we actually make some change? And the second thing I was thinking about was the growth dynamics of Black Rock City, and how that year my team had to let over 100 camps know they would not receive placement, and how challenging that was for me personally to be in those conversations, but really thinking about the future. So in 5 to 10 years, what happens? Is it 150 camps, 200 camps, 250 camps? How does this scale? What happens if the city is the same size and people want placement because they want to do it, or because it's attached to resources, or what have you? And so I wondered, where do we go from there as well? And in thinking about this, I realized that all this problem solving was happening with the best of intentions, but it was happening toward different directions. And there wasn't a clarity of where we were trying to get in that 5 to 10 year time scale. That we were all doing this really great work, but where were we actually trying to get to? And so the Cultural Direction Setting Project was born. And to kind of talk about the problem, there we go. So the problem, was around trying to solve these problems, but, also that there were tensions within the placement team, within the organization. Those were becoming visible and felt in our community. And also we were noticing, and many of you perhaps have noticed, a rise in individual behavior that many would deem problematic. And that, from my perspective, that connects back to camps in some way, and a acculturation that either is or is not happening in those camps, because most people are part of some camp. And so we set about to create this project to create some alignment and have some clarity around communication, around vision, direction, policy, to help us move forward. And when we talk about a vision, I'm not talking about a vision for the art on the open Playa. I'm not talking about a vision for your regional event or the DPW. I'm talking about a vision for residential Black Rock City, so the places people camp, placed camping, open camping, walking camping, where people live in Black Rock City. So it's important to set that context. And so where we began was what we called phase 0, ground floor, like below the ground floor. And we started with our key stakeholders, our key leaders, Marion Goodell, who you met earlier, Harley, who's one of the co-founders of Burning Man, Charlie Dolman, who's the event director of Black Rock City, Heather White is the managing director of Burning Man Project, and myself, Larry Harvey, was also with us for the first couple of months before his stroke, which was really special to have his imprint into this project, and then Simone, our facilitator. And what we did in this phase 0 approach was to get on the same page. So build the framework together, get clear on the objectives, understand each other, so that as we moved forward, we had that foundation to rely upon. That was really, really important. And so one of the takeaways, and I'll be kind of peppering these throughout, in that we learned from the beginning and has served us all the way through to today, is having a distinct facilitator when you're engaging in a very complex process like this, or really anything that has a lot of emotion attached to it. Culture has a lot of emotion attached to it. And so having someone besides the convener who is playing that facilitation role, who is serving the process, who is co-designing the process and serving the participants in the process, has been so essential. And so I would recommend to anyone dealing with anything related to culture that's involving a lot of people, have someone play that role exclusively, who can really hold that for everybody. She's been amazing. And so, we started with this phase 0, and then we said, okay, we are going to create a visioning group. And it's not going to be the folks that you just saw on the last screen, which is a model of empowerment, and that took a lot of discussion, a lot of figuring out who will be this group of people. And we had a conversation, which I really loved, where we talked about collective decision-making processes that we had been a part of that went really well, where the people were really in the right frame of mind, where the process really worked, where the outcomes were great. And what we came out of that with were some qualities. And I'm just going to let you read these for a moment. I'll give you a little bit here. This is a pretty badass list, eh? Yeah. These are the people that we needed to find for this. And I think it's not just for a project like this, it's really for, I'm sure, many things that you're doing. You're like, oh yeah, I need these people. And I just want to comment especially on the second one. With a project where we're talking about a vision for the culture, it's really easy to kind of get in a preservationist mentality of, insert your golden year here, let's make Burning Man like it was in whatever year it was for you, that you thought it was the best. And we wanted to make sure that we honored our history, honored parts of our cultural identity that carry from the past into the present and will carry us into the future, without having folks who are really stuck in that, who really can't see past this moment that we're in. And so that was a really critical find, was folks who are committed to the moving forward piece of this, to the evolution of this rather than the preservation of this. So that was really important. And we came out with these fantastic people. I'm not going to read their names, but in blue are all the camps that they represent. They are camp leaders, they are community members, artists. We have an RC and Meta Regional on that group. We have board members, we have staff. And we also in these camps have different camp sizes, different camp tenures, some very new camps, some very long-standing camps, to really bring, it's a group of, I think, 18 people to the table who can carry Black Rock City with them. And in that process, what I found really interesting was getting into some of the theory. I'm not going to get too into this, but if you like theory around this stuff, look up the U process, look up the Presencing Institute. Theory junkies, yeah, any theory junkies? So Simone, our facilitator, really brought this fantastic theory to the table. And the thing I'll say about it is that I'm someone who's a little more structured in my thinking often. I want to do long-range planning. I want to think through all the pieces that come together. And Simone and her process is very emergent. And it's been a beautiful partnership in that way. And it's also tested me at points to really allow for more emergence than perhaps I'm comfortable with. But that's been a lot of where the magic has happened. So I encourage those kind of structure folks like myself to, when you're really kind of going into the unknown like this, you have to be able to let go of what you thought things were going to look like. And so we set up this visioning group, and we also set up loops back with the phase 0 group, the core leadership group. And that was intentional, and it wasn't a loop like a meeting where I would come back to the group and say, hey, this is what we've done. It was at our milestones, at our pieces of work that came out of the visioning group. We would have a meeting where folks from the visioning group would come to the leadership group and represent the work. And most importantly, get input from them about what they thought to bring their voices back into the process of each of the major steps. So that was, I think, when I think about empowerment and how that really happens, this has been a critical design in that process. So 2 more takeaways is being open and flexible. And when Simone and I were talking about this, she was like, this is true, but you also need enough structure and enough planning to know where it's going to go so that you can be open, so that you can be flexible, so that you can open up the doors a little wider than you thought you were going to. And then the next thing is empowering thoughtfully chosen people and setting up those loops in advance so everyone knows where we're going, so that we can all be on the same page. So we convened this group on the Playa last year, and part of that U process is where you open up your senses, where you really kind of immerse yourself in things that are unknown to you. And so we asked this group of people, hey, where do you tend to hang out in Black Rock City? Where are your haunts? Where are your go-tos? And then we sent them to the places that were the opposite of that. We made a list of camps. The placement team was great. I was like, I need a camp like this. They were like, gotcha, here you go. And we sent them off to explore, and to also explore open camping and walk-in camping if that was unfamiliar to them, and to basically interview the camps. They didn't know about cultural direction setting yet, but just kind of get a sense of what they thought about the culture and have a really kind of authentic conversation about that and see what they learned. And then we launched the big community engagement. How many of you took the survey for cultural direction setting? Any of you? Nice. I see about 15, 20 hands. That was a long survey. It was somewhere north of 50 questions. It really forced the complexity to come to bear, and that was by design, because it's easy from the outside looking in at these problems to say, oh, the org just needs to do blah, and it'll all be fixed. But it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. And so this survey was pushing people to really force their thoughts, their brains to grapple with the complexity of all of this. So we got over almost 5,000 of them. We did interviews to kind of get depth with community leaders, with key staff who work with camps. And then we also did a decentralized model of community conversations. Were any of you aware of that or hosted one? Thank you. So we created a kit, and we said, hey, if you want to host a community conversation in your local community, here's how you can do it. Here's a meeting structure. Here's a way to take notes that will be useful for our group, and go off and do that. And over 20 of them happened, so you got some kind of location-specific perspectives as well. And then finally, folks feel like they're commenting into nothingness on the internet. Well, we read those comments. We read almost 5,000 of them to get additional input. So a lot of input here was really critical. And so a takeaway is, really being strategic about that community engagement, but then go really hard with it. Because as I said earlier, when I was thinking about the struggles that we were facing, that perception gap of what was really going on, a lot of that comes back to trust and the need to rebuild trust. And so with the community engagement, a really important piece was how can we do some rebuilding of that trust? How can we invite people in and really listen to their perspectives and have that shape, the output shape the vision that we're creating? So then we read all of that stuff. It's a lot of reading, a lot of highlighting, a lot of finding themes, a lot of finding outliers, a lot of trying to understand the tensions, and then we also visualize that. This is on a Burning Man Journal blog post, which you can blow up and look at in more detail. And really, it's interesting, there's a piece in the Burning Man Journal where we drew lines between these things to show the tensions. We say we want this, but then we say we want that, and those don't really go together, and that's okay. That's part of who we are, is tension. And then we've posted a lot of what we've shared. So 2 pieces have come out recently, another one's coming out soon. The What We Heard post, I think, is particularly interesting because we draw out the themes that we heard in the survey. So if you're like, I wonder what almost 5,000 surveys said, read that. You'll learn what they said. And all of this was in service to a clear, actionable vision. And I want to share with you actually the objectives that we are going after in this visioning process. And I want to share them, some of you may be personally interested in Black Rock City and call that home, but I also want to share it from the perspective of whatever your community, event, organization, etc. may be, whether any of these things are relevant for you and for your community. So you could substitute the word Burning Man Project for your community, for your organization. So the first one, why does Burning Man Project give camps resources? Resources being space or placement, ticket access, early arrival. What does Burning Man expect of groups when we give them resources? The second one is the flip. What do camps expect and need from Burning Man Project to fulfill this vision, including and beyond resources? How does Burning Man treat, support, and interact with camps? And will Burning Man treat some camps differently? And if so, why? The third one, how does our residential Black Rock City vision fit within Burning Man Project's vision, mission, and operational needs? How does global citizenship fit into Black Rock City? And how does theme camp work in the world impact Black Rock City and vice versa? It's a big question. The fourth one, where is the line? Where is the line for giving resources, for how much of the city should we place? And where is the line for when we don't place a camp? Why do we do that? And finally, the kind of mother of them all is, what is our vision for residential Black Rock City in 5 to 10 years? What are the mid and long-term cultural impacts of that vision? And this is where it's really hard to be clear, actionable, and aspirational, but it's really important to try and do all of those things. That's what we're striving to do in this vision. Wish us luck. So this is what we're after, is answering these questions in a vision. Does that make sense? Does that feel like the right questions? So there's a lot there. And so was it 2 weekends ago, 3 weekends ago, we were at the Theme Camp Symposium. We had over 500 camp leaders from around the country and the world join us in San Francisco. And we actually shared the rough draft of the vision, which was kind of really scary. I was like, are we really gonna do this? It was my idea, but when we were up there, it was like, okay. Because it's not often that you share unfinished work and invite people to comment on it in that kind of raw, vulnerable way. But we did that. And today, I'm not gonna share the rough draft vision itself. If you would like to see that, it's now up on YouTube. It's also on Facebook Live. We did a live stream event for it. But instead, I'm actually gonna flip the rough draft of our vision into questions. Because again, I feel like what's perhaps more interesting for you all is where these questions might be underlying in your communities. Maybe they're not relevant at all. Maybe that's not something that really matters to you. Or maybe it's something down the road, something that's gonna be showing up on your doorstep in a year, 5 years, 10 years. And it's something to have a little bit of thought about now. So here are some of those themes. So the first kind of big theme was around needs and expectations of theme camps and the organization, which goes back to those first 2 objectives. So here's a question. Should placement curate or continue facilitating? Is meeting the minimum bar for interactivity and the criteria enough to be placed? Is the minimum enough? How do camps know how they're doing from the perspective of those who hold resources? How do they know? on the question and the theme of where is the line, how much space should be placed and pre-planned versus open? In that open space, what dynamics are showing up? Are those dynamics working for people? Are they healthy? How do you decide who does not receive resources, whatever they may be in your context? And what's the right approach to holding groups accountable? How far do you go in that holding accountable? How much do you enforce? How much do you create policy and procedure around that versus let it be what it'll be? So those are kind of the first questions I'd ask. The next theme is around global citizenship in Black Rock City. And the first question is quite obvious. What is global citizenship really? How do you define it? Should camps or groups receive benefits for furthering the mission? And in our context, that question looks like, should a theme camp who is doing work in the world, global citizenship, however you may define that, should they receive preferential placement over a camp that is not doing those things? Should there be any benefit in Black Rock City for that? And if we went down that road, how would these dynamics affect the experience of being together? And when are we expecting too much? When are we pushing people a little too hard? The last theme is around redefining plug and play, which is something that we're endeavoring to do, is redefining. The question here is, there it is. What specific behaviors is someone talking about when they say plug and play, or insert whatever generalization is happening in your community? What are they really talking about? What specific behaviors are they referring to? How should we address those specific problematic behaviors on their own as individual things versus lumping them together? And what is actually problematic? And what is at the root of these behaviors? What role does acculturation play? And finally, what paradigm will serve your organization, your community, and the outcomes that we all want? What's the paradigm that's actually going to help us do that? So these are the kind of things we are grappling with. And I would encourage you, if it has any relevance in your situation, to also grapple with a bit. So one thing I want to share from the Rough Draft Vision presentation is kind of one of the new paradigms we're playing with. And this paradigm is kind of saying, okay, there's behaviors, specific behaviors that are okay, ones that might be okay, and ones that are never okay. And we're still playing with what exactly goes in each of these boxes. So this is, again, rough draft, not a final copy. But what's interesting about this is that, let's say you have a camp or a group who is really in the okay, doing great column, which is not represented here, and they have a couple things that might be okay. They're doing kind of this, kind of that. Well, overall, that camp's pretty okay. They're riding the line somewhere, but overall, they're doing it right. But what does it look like when there's a camp that's kind of checking off all the might be okay boxes? Like, that's where it gets really uncomfortable, really tense. And when you have someone who's doing a never okay, how do you work with that context? How do you work with that behavior? So that's something that we're playing with and trying to understand more. And so at the Theme Camp Symposium, we shared our rough draft of the vision, and then we heard what people thought about it. It was amazing. It was so helpful. So we did that in 2 sessions. And where this kind of goes in the process is, okay, we're going to put out this vision. My goal is that that happens before the burn this year. But that is way too late to make any realistic policy changes for Black Rock City 2019. That's not going to happen because now we're all busy just trying to make Burning Man happen. So in 2019, we are asking the community to look at the vision and say, okay, not everyone's going to love everything in the vision, but whatever it is that you love, whatever piece of it that you're like, yes, that, then we want camps to take those pieces and go make them real and talk with their communities and say, how do we make this real in our camp? Let's make it real because that's where the culture really happens, right? And then we'll come back behind for 2020 and do the work of operationalizing, implementing, looking at the places where this does impact our guidelines, our criteria, our policy, our process, and make updates to put this in alignment so that we make that vision real from all angles. So the final takeaway I'll say here is that, and this is probably the most important thing that I've learned and to hold in this process, is minding and holding this tension between over planning for culture, and just reacting to what's happening. And with cultural direction setting, we're taking some steps toward the over planning side of that spectrum, which is a little nerve-wracking. And we're at a place where we've decided that we do want to take those steps, but we don't want to go too far either. And there's also this tension between the approach of centralizing versus decentralizing too much in the way that we do that. And so there is no right answer, but I would invite everyone in your roles to think about where you are on this spectrum with each action that you're taking, with each strategy session that you might have, with every conversation, and try and hold that as best you can. So, final thing is, let's talk. If you have cultural crossroads that you are facing, I would love to hear about them. If you have wisdom for us in this process, I would love to hear it. And I'll be doing a lunch table topic if you would like to go a little bit deeper. So thank you for listening, for being a part of this, because you are by being here right now. And thank you for your support.